I'm Gretchen Helfrich. I'm an attorney here at Lovie and Lovie, and lately a lot of our attention and energy has been focused on Chicago, where the city's been in a bit of an uproar since the release of a video showing a Chicago police officer shooting and killing Laquan McDonald. Well, on December 2nd, the Houston Police Department also released a video related to a similar shooting. The victim in that case was Jordan Baker. He's a 26-year-old African-American father and college student, and he was shot by a Houston police officer. My colleague at Lovie and Lovie, David Owens, has just filed a lawsuit on behalf of Jordan Baker's family, and he's here today to talk about it. Hi, David.
Hi, Gretchen.
David, let's start. Can you just give us a summary of what happened to Jordan Baker?
Yeah, as you indicated, Jordan was shot by a Houston police officer while he was unarmed. He was also partially clothed at the time. He had no shirt on and had been initially stopped by the police officer for riding his bike and wearing a hoodie. And after the officer removed the hoodie from Mr. Baker as he tried to get away from the illegal stop, there was an altercation. And by altercation, I mean you can see in the video that was recently released that Jordan Baker is walking away slowly, walking away slowly, walking away slowly. There's some period of time goes by, and then he feels, who knows what he felt, but he took off, running for his life. And Officer Castro, that's the officer's name, started to actually go back to his patrol car and then decided to turn around and chase him, and ended up shooting him in an alley.
Now, let's just clarify the video. Unlike the Laquan McDonald video here in Chicago, the video in your case in Houston doesn't show the actual shooting itself. It shows events moments before the shooting. Is that right?
That's correct. The video that we've seen, there is some video that we're trying to have analyzed to see if it depicts aspects of the shooting that we don't believe it does at this point. But it's important because our lawsuit is a bit different than some of the stuff happening with Laquan McDonald, which is, one, we knew that the shooting wasn't captured on the video that we were trying to get. Second, the lawsuit also deals with other important issues related to stopping African American and men. And it's not illegal in America to ride a bike or to have a hooded sweatshirt or to go to the strip mall 3 blocks from your house to try to pick something up. Jordan Baker was that guy, wearing a hooded sweatshirt in the winter, wearing flip-flops on a bike a couple blocks from his house. And what starts with...
He was Trayvon Martin.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what this goes into, and that's what the lawsuit is also about. So people say, oh, the video didn't show the shooting. Why does it matter? Well, it really matters because what you see is that he was in this parking lot for less than 10 seconds before the officer decided to interact with him twice. And there's no reason that he should have been stopped, and he was afraid. And I think a lot of people in his position, a black guy in a hoodie, would be afraid once you know what's been going on from Trayvon Martin and even before that, Oscar Grant in Oakland. And it resulted in the very thing that he was trying to prevent.
So what you're saying is this video is important not because it shows the shooting, but it shows that there's absolutely no reason for this officer to have had anything to do with Jordan Baker.
Right. We have in our complaint an equal protection claim, and what that alleges is that he was stopped on account of his race, and being an African American black man wearing a hooded sweatshirt was the reason that he was stopped, and that he shouldn't have ever been stopped.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the claims that you have brought in this case against the city of Houston or the Houston Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
So Officer Castro is one of the defendants in the suit.
Right.
But you're also bringing claims against the department. Talk a little bit about those claims.
So in order to hold a city, like a municipality, whether it's Chicago or Houston, or liable as a city, you have to prove what's called a Monell claim, or that this was not an isolated incident that they couldn't have predicted would happen. Because the law says, if some rogue officer just goes rogue and does something crazy that violates people's rights, that's a bummer, and the officer should be held accountable. But the city, as its own separate legal entity, isn't liable for those things. So you have to show more. And here we have a couple different claims against the city itself. First, the one I just referred to, which has to do with racial profiling and stops by the Houston police officers. So this is in the complaint, is that over 40% of the traffic stops involved with Houston police officers are of African Americans. The problem is that African Americans make up less than 25% of the population. So there's already a disparate impact when you see that, and you see those statistics. And the thing that makes it so telling in this case is the city of Houston, unlike the city of Chicago, at least puts out some nominal measure of transparency. And they have all of their stops recorded on their own website. They have a racial profiling report that they produce at the end of each year. They have for the last few years. The problem is, every year they've produced the reports, there are these disparities. And they say, okay, looks like we're about at the same. And they fail to realize that there's an overrepresentation of certain minority communities. It's not even on their radar. They've essentially admitted that they're over-policing a group of individuals. The same thing holds true with the shooting of police-involved shooting incidents. And this is, again, on the Houston Police Department's website. And what you have indicated there is that of all of the shootings that have happened in 2015, over 50% of them involve African Americans. Again, that less than a quarter of the population in the city. So this indicates that something is wrong here.
So you mentioned in your complaint, you describe other shootings that have gone on, but let me play devil's advocate or defendant's advocate here for a second. Every shooting, couldn't you argue you have to look at the particular circumstances? You have to look at the particular interaction between the officer and the individual who gets shot, and what kind of threat was perceived, what was, were they reasonable in perceiving that as a threat? How can you just say, well, based on the fact that these were all African American men, you have a problem?
Well, I think this has to do with the backdrop, is that these shootings don't happen in isolation. Maybe you can say that once, maybe you can say that twice. Can you really say that 200 times in a row? And what has happened is that this goes to a deeper issue that transcends all of the individual shootings, which is, how are the officers trained? Are the officers ever subject to any discipline or possibility of discipline if they do something wrong, if they make a mistake? Or is that covered up? Or do they know that they can do it with impunity? Or do they know that here are the types of things that you can say to make it seem like this was justified?
Like what? You talk about that in your complaint too.
We do. You talk about, you say that the subject was doing things in a threatening manner, or in our case, that he put his hand near his waistband. The problem with that is that if somebody's running, their hands naturally go near their waistband. In addition, as I described earlier, he didn't have a shirt on, and you had just been involved with him 2 to 3 feet away for a very long period of time. He could have seen his waistband clear as day. And if you thought he had a gun at the time, you should have arrested him for that. Now, the thing that is interesting is, if you take a step back, the Houston Chronicle, the big newspaper in Houston, did a series 2 years ago about police-involved shootings, and it's called Bulletproof. And the reason that the series is called Bulletproof is because they analyzed all of these killings by police officers that have happened since 2005 to 2013. And what they found was none of them have ever been criminally prosecuted, and none of them have ever been found at any fault whatsoever. There's one case, and that was an accidental discharge. So putting the accident away, every single intentional discharge the city of Houston has stood behind.
Has said was justified?
Has said was justified. No one was disciplined. And that series also indicates that Houston has trained its police officers less than sort of the standard bar of training that you would anticipate that officers would have.
This is not this is essentially exactly what we're hearing here in Chicago, that police officers don't get disciplined when they shoot unjustifiably, or it's never found to be unjustified. The only time they find it to be unjustified is if the officer's off duty, but an on-duty shooting, never. Is it the same story everywhere, David?
Possibly. there is a systemic issue in a lot of police departments, and it's a cultural one. And it's a cultural one that has been spread through powerful organizations like the Fraternal Order of the Police. And that union has so much power, and
That's the
has-
union here in Chicago.
That's the union here in Chicago. It's a national union. Wherever you go, there's the Fraternal Order of the Police, and that has lobbied for all sorts of things. And really, it's an extension of slavery. And that's what happened. Is after the Civil War, it was like, well, now we have this problem with these minority communities, and laws were passed. Until the Civil Rights Act was passed, and pervasive subjugation of minority people has continued. And that's why you see riots in places that are probably still the most palpably racist. Ferguson wasn't just about Michael Brown. Ferguson was about what's been going on there underneath the scene. And that's why Baltimore exploded when this happened, is because there's something been going on there in the community. And actually, one of the better things that our president has said recently was that the black community has been complaining about these things for years and years and years and years. And no one has done anything about it. And the thing that the community needed was some proof. And that's what has been provided. When you see Scott Brown running away and being shot in the back, when you see the video of Freddie Gray, and that's what video has really changed, is it provided proof. And that's why the Laquan McDonald thing is so important in Chicago, is because it substantiates the claims that people have been making for a long time. And sometimes people need to see that. You need to sort of see it, the public spectacle, that's what, of the shooting, in order to get people out of their homes and onto the street and to be really concerned.
So, David, given everything you've just described, you're describing a pretty massive problem. Tell me, in your opinion, what a single lawsuit like the one you've brought in Houston, what can that do? Or several lawsuits? Or, what's the role of lawyers like you and me in addressing these problems?
Well, I think that there are two sides to these things, which is there's the community side, there's the legal side. Well, maybe there's more than two. There are a number of components to any time you're trying to get systemic reform. And they go hand in hand, sort of stereoscopically, you could say, is you need one to help reinforce the other. And so the lawsuit provides a legal hook and a reckoning with the city and with the officer in a courtroom. And it forces them to enact policies. It forces them to be legally liable. But sometimes that's not enough. And that's not enough if people don't really care. And lawsuits can be lost, or lawsuits can be silently scuttled away if people don't really care. So you actually need both. And it's important to realize that, Martin Luther King, they had lawyers, and they had great lawyers. And that was an important tool, is that letters from the Birmingham jail spawned a whole bunch of different legal precedent about that civil disobedience that were necessary to help other people in the struggle. And so you can't have one without the other. But I do think, and what I was talking about earlier, is the issue of holding the city liable as the city is a big thing. And that's one thing that sparks reform, because that means not just, you can't just say it was one person, but your city has a policy that is unconstitutional. And that does require some type of a change.
David Oden, thanks very much for talking to me today.
Thanks.
Good luck with the suit.
Thank you.